Now to the sectarian conflict in southern Syria, and reports that the Syrian army could redeploy to Sweida after the collapse of a ceasefire deal there. Friday saw a fresh outbreak of violence between Sunni Bedouin militia and Druze fighters. Under a US brokered deal, Syrian government forces withdrew from the area on Thursday after coming under heavy bombardment from Israel, which supports the Druze religious minority. The violence of recent days has left almost 600 people dead. The UN's human rights agency, the OHCHR, is calling for the killing to stop and for those responsible to be held to account.
Steps need to be taken to ensure protection of people in Sweida and across Syria. The bloodshed and the violence must stop. Credible reports that our office has received indicate widespread violations and abuses, including summary executions and arbitrary killings, kidnappings, destruction of private property, and looting of homes in the southern city of Sweida. Syria's interim authorities must ensure independent, prompt and transparent investigations into all violations. All those responsible must be held to account.
Caroline Rose is Director of Crime Conflict Nexus and Military Withdrawals at the New Lines Institute, where she has a particular focus on the Middle East. Welcome to the EW. So southern Syria seems to be locked in a long-standing cycle of attacks and reprisals which seem to flare up every so often. Is it inevitable that this cycle will continue?
Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be here. I think that it is inevitable. I think that even when the regime controlled Syria, the South was always a contested area where we would see constant kidnappings, contestation, violent clashes, and killings between different community members, including Bedouin tribes, different prominent families, Druze community members, and then, of course, the regime and Hezbollah. Now the picture, of course, has changed. We now have the regime kicked out of Syria. We also have a new administration, and it's very clear that Druze communities in Sweida have opposed and have expressed hesitation regarding HTS and their ideological origins and their nature of rule over a new Syria. So I do think that this has been inevitable. That being said, I think that this is a conflict that could be certainly better managed by the new administration. I think that there were many ways to prevent the scale and scope of the outbreak that we saw occur in Sweida between different communities, as well as, of course, the response that we saw towards many Druze community leaders from forces that were affiliated with HTS and the new administration in Syria.
So that's you think, that's your assessment. The best we can hope for is that this interim government, or whoever succeeds it, contains this and tries to keep the number of casualties down. That's it. That's as good as it gets.
I think that this is an area that absolutely needs a better preventative strategy. With any country that would be coming out of nearly 2 decades of civil war, you are bound to have tensions between different communities, revenge killings, acts of vengeance, clashes, violence. And so this, I think, was well anticipated amongst every Syria analyst that has been following the war and its aftermath after the regime has fallen. But that being said, I think that there's another element that additionally needs to be accounted for, which is the role that Israel wants to play in the South. When the regime, was in power in the South, there was a deconfliction mechanism. It was very fragile. It was very tentative, but it was a mechanism that was primarily maintained by Russia and in collaboration with Druze communities. Israel sees southern Syria as a buffer zone of sorts. It really wants to ensure that Israel can project some degree of influence into the south. And right now, it has lost that with the absence of the regime. So that is why we're seeing Israel co-opt many of these Druze community members to try and contest and push for further influence in Syria's southern region. And that, I think, calls even more so for preventative measures, a long-term strategy from the new interim government that seeks to build bridges rather than exacerbate this divide between local communities and the new administration.
Lots in there to look at. Let's pick out one of the strands of that in terms of the relationship with Israel, because it sounds like you're saying that whoever rules Syria, whether it be this interim government or again whoever comes after it, whoever rules Syria has to accept Israel's demand for a seat at the table in the south of the country.
I think that it'll be important for any new administration, any ruler of Syria, not to accept Israeli territorial acquisition of the South. And I think that that's something that Israel has pushed for in the past. But I do think that they have to come to terms that Israel wants a degree of monitoring. It wants a degree of transparency and clarity into what is happening in the south of Syria. And that's where a potential deconfliction agreement can come into place. We saw that before, and it was brokered by Russia, and they managed a lot of these tensions between different communities in the regime. They also prevented the regime from being able to consolidate large amounts of control in both Dara and Sweida provinces. And I think that it's going to look different for the new administration. There has to be control by the Syrian army in the south. They have not been able to do this because they know there are local tensions and the potential for violence. But I think it's going to be very important to set up a mechanism to communicate with Israel and to try and prevent Israeli direct attacks, both into southern Syria as well as into the capital in Damascus and elsewhere in the country.
So how dangerous is this current situation then for Syria's interim government? Are we looking at the transition to democracy potentially unravelling as a result of all this?
I think this is existential. And I think that we've seen violent outbreaks before in Syria, but this is one of the few that where the scale and the scope, the amount of clashes, the amount of dead community members and dead Syrian army members, it indicates of what is to potentially come, and that is widespread intercommunal clashes, tensions, kidnappings, revenge killings that transcends beyond southern Syria. This could revive tensions between Alawite communities and Sunni communities along the Mediterranean coast in hotspots like Latakia and Tartus. It could also revive tensions between the new administration and Kurdish communities. What we've seen in the south, the treatment on both sides between Druze community members and those that have aligned themselves with the new administration, this has sparked new fears amongst minority communities about how the interim government is handling intercommunal tensions. And it's undermined a lot of the hope and the trust in these new governmental institutions. So I think it's very, very existential. This could become a much more widespread, bloody conflict.
That's a sobering analysis, and we thank you for it. Caroline Rose, policy analyst from the New Lines Institute.
Thank you.
Let's explore this with Joost Hiltermann. He's director of the International Crisis Group's Middle East and North Africa programme. He joins us from Brussels. Welcome to DW. So let's start with those unconfirmed reports that Syrian government forces are to return to Sweida province to try and quell this latest violence. If true, is that likely to work?
Well, we have to be clear as to what government forces we're talking about, because there is the Syrian army and there is the general security, which is the internal security force. And I think because the army was present in Sweida for a while, but Israel has clearly warned the Syrian leadership that it doesn't want the army deployed in the south. So I think what we're talking about is the internal security force, the general security, which was deployed also in Sweida, which then withdrew and which should be able to go back if there is a deal in place between the Druze spiritual leadership and political leadership on the one hand and the Syrian government on the other.
And why is this force likely to be more successful than the Syrian army?
it's not whether it can be more successful. It is that Israel will not allow the Syrian army to deploy in that area in Sweida. So it will not be going there. But in any case, whenever there is a domestic dispute or conflict in any country, it should be the internal security force that steps in, not the army, which is there to protect the borders of a country. So in any case, it should be general security that ought to take on this task and has, in fact, tried to take on this task, but has not been particularly successful until this moment.
What is it about the combatants in this, or perhaps about the country itself, that means that these ceasefires, and there have been a number, why haven't they held?
So the real problem in Syria until now is that it's a fresh regime, a new regime that overthrew the previous one. I call it regime, but I mean the political system that is now in charge under President Ahmed al-Sharaa. And it is still building up the security forces, which is basically a assembly of armed groups that operated against the Syrian regime before toppling it in December of last year. And so to unify these forces, to professionalize them, is going to take time. And so far, it has not achieved that point. And of course, Syria is a mosaic, an ethnic and religious mosaic of groups that all are clamoring for protection and are all afraid of the central government, that it will harm them or that other groups will harm them. And so if the central government cannot bring the security that they need, then these local conflicts are bound to get out of hand, as they did the last few days in Sweida.
So, as you say, this is a mosaic of a country. The US was involved in brokering recent ceasefires. Can you see them wanting to get dragged back into such a messy situation?
Well, being dragged in is again, a big term, because militarily, obviously, the United States will not do that. Politically, it can. And I think, it has made efforts to mediate between the Syrian government and the Israeli government. And that is the top priority right now. At the local level, there are mediators who can work to bring the Druze leadership and the Syrian government together on this question and to work out a local arrangement. But what is very important for the United States is to mediate between Israel and the Syrian government.
Right. And just a quick word on trust. And one wonders how the interim government can rebuild trust with the Druze community, given that the recent atrocities apparently perpetrated against them by government forces, and of course the Druze long-standing mistrust of the former jihadis who now run the country.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. And when I was in Sweida in February and met with some of the members of the Druze leadership, and they made very clear. They said, first of all, as Druze, we are Syrian citizens. And so we choose to work with the Syrian government. That said, we also don't necessarily trust the Syrian government because of who they are, as you mentioned. And so we need to work these things out. When there were problems in Druze suburbs of Damascus in May, the government and the Druze leadership there came to a local agreement. The same thing can happen here in Sweida as well. But it will take an effort to overcome the mistrust that has arisen from the atrocities that have been committed in the last few days.
Thanks for guiding us through that so clearly. Joost Hiltermann from the International Crisis Group.
All right, let's bring in Robert E. Hunter. He served as US ambassador to NATO between 1993 and 1998 and was director of Middle East Affairs on the National Security Council staff in the Carter administration. Great to have you with us. The US brokered a ceasefire in Sweida province, but it didn't hold. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a contest going on here, led by the Israeli government, in terms of the domination of Syria. The Israelis do want to be able to have as much control in the south of the country as they can. They also want to make sure that the Turks and others don't have a lot of influence over the government that's operating out of Damascus. and they are doing what's been happening at more or less as a show of force to show that they can more or less influence, if not determine, the future of internal politics within Syria. If you want to look to the locus of decisions, you need to look to Jerusalem, not to Damascus.
Do you think the President Ahmed al-Sharaa has Syria under control at this point?
Well, it's hard to tell at this great distance, but from what we're hearing with the collapse of the two-day-old ceasefire, I guess the answer has to be no, because he did withdraw the Syrian government troops as part of the ceasefire. But I suspect, and it's hard to tell because it's middle of the night, that they're probably moving back into that area to try to create at least some kind of sense that they have to be taken seriously as Israel tries to dominate not just that part of Syria, but to demonstrate to Syria that Israel, is going to be a major, if not the major, determiner of Syria's future.
And Robert, Israel says it has allowed the Syrian government forces limited access to Sweida. Why the change of heart from them?
Well, I think he's trying to calculate overall what his relationships are going to be, not just with people in his own country where he's got the Druze minority to be concerned about, but also with regard to Turkey, with regard to the Arab states of the Persian Gulf, and regard to Israel. And one of the questions for him is he going to be able to have a government with a reasonable degree of stability that can govern the whole country, or is he only going to be able to govern part of the country? And if so, which part? And will he always have at his back, or at his front actually, the Israelis trying to take control of as much of southern Syria as they can, in addition to the Golan Heights, which they seized a number of years ago, and which the U.S. administration says that's fine with us if Israel just wants to keep the Golan Heights.
With that in mind, how important is it for President Ahmed al-Sharaa to rebuild trust with the Druze community, especially after the atrocities of the recent days there, or the reports of?
Well, he obviously would like to build trust with the Druze while keeping the trust, if he can build it, with the rest of the country. But he also has to have to show the Israelis that he's not simply going to allow Israel to call all the shots in his country. He's going to try to build some kind of sovereignty and integrity for Syria now that the bad guys have left, and he's now, for the first time in, 15 years, there's a chance actually to build a country which is not just built upon repression and torture and murder as it was under the last group.
Former US Ambassador to NATO and foreign policy expert Robert E. Hunter, thank you so much for your input.
Thank you very much.